Hi, everyone, and welcome. Let's talk about language oriented subject education, otherwise known in Dutch as Taalgericht Vakonderwijs, TVO. This is all about building language proficiency, not just in English class, but across all school subjects. Okay. So, why does this even matter? Why is it important to have language that is subject specific? Language for geography, biology, history, for example. Well, language plays a crucial role in learning all across the different subjects in secondary school. Um, Research done, a PISA study, revealed that there were significant reading deficits, gaps among 15-year-old learners. So, this kind of subject specific education can help to improve reading ability. And we might take a moment for reflection to think about the challenges that we have seen our students face when it comes to, for example, academic language, as we learned, otherwise known as CALP. So, some of the core concepts in subject specific language learning are that we understand that there's everyday language, that is BICS, the interpersonal language that we use on a daily basis, versus more academic specialized language. So, it's at a higher proficiency level. Yeah, this proves a challenge. And that there are dimensions of learning. So, we need context support. There's different levels of complexity in terms of cognitive load, and that whether material is oral or written will definitely play a role in learning. So, the three pillars in this sort of education is obviously language support, lots of interaction, and how much context we give our learners. And a point for discussion is always how can we integrate all three of these concepts in our classes, not just for English, but also when we're teaching other stuff. So, from theory into practice, we know about Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. That's a key concept. If you're not familiar with it, go back and do the homework reading or look up Vygotsky's ZPD. There's also scaffolding, and in a moment we'll talk about designed scaffolding versus interactional scaffolding. An example is a lesson on magnets in a science class, where we might move from more everyday BICS language into the more specialized academic language. Okay, designed scaffolding versus interactional scaffolding. What is the difference? Well, when scaffolding is designed, that means it's pre planned and the supports are embedded into the curriculum or the learning materials. So it's structured in advance by the teacher. For example, breaking up a big project into smaller sequenced steps. Using visuals like graphic organizers, sentence starters, examples in a workbook. If you think about our reading cultural contexts module, and we're going to be using visual timelines, that is a scaffolding approach, a designed approach. There's also online learning that can adapt based on student performance. Interactional scaffolding is much more spontaneous in the moment through teacher student or peer to peer interaction. So it's flexible, it's conversational, and responsive. For example, a teacher might rephrase a complex question to make it clearer, or guiding student thinking with prompts like, hey, what happens if we try this next step? Or a peer modeling how to solve part of a math problem during group work. This is much more spontaneous interactional scaffolding. Let's talk about some of the strategies that are available to us as teachers. One that we already know about is activating prior knowledge. Another useful strategy to build CALP, subject-specific language, is collaborative learning, peer discussion, having learners work together. And strategies such as mnemonics, otherwise known in Dutch as ezelsbruggetjes, highlighting, planning and sequencing steps of learning. To build inclusive classrooms where everyone can learn equally, multilingualism is truly an asset rather than assume that native languages, first languages, should be avoided in English class. Let's include them and make use of them. Being aware of what's called the Pygmalion effect, and how this might play into teacher and student expectations. You might think of this as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what is the Pygmalion effect? Well, if the teacher believes that a student is especially capable or less capable, then this teacher belief shapes how the teacher interacts with the students. So they might give more encouragement, more attention, more challenging tasks if they think the student is capable, or if it's the opposite, less encouragement, less attention, dumbing material down. So then the student response is that they internalize this. They might gain confidence or lose confidence, and they perform, accordingly. The outcome then eventually is the original expectation then becomes reality. High expectations from the teacher lead to higher achievement. Lower expectations can lead to underachievement. Now, of course, we want to be as unbiased and objective as teachers as we possibly can, but we are human. I'm wondering, what do you think? Let's discuss at some point. Do you think your expectations as a teacher actually influence student results? It's worth considering. Feedback and assessment also play a very important role in all of this. So feedback can be motivation, and it can provide correction. And we can integrate this into our subject and language goals in our assessments. So, for example, an activity. Rewrite a sample student response. Maybe it's in very BIC's everyday language, and then ask learners to translate that into more CALP, subject-specific specialist language. We can't talk about Taalgericht Vakonderwijs without talking about Cummins quadrants. Now, in the homework reading, you'll have learned about this. In essence, just to summarize, Cummins came up with the idea that as teachers, we need to move our learners from quadrant A to B to C and then to D. A is basically the easiest for language learning and content learning because there's a lot of context and the material is easy to understand. It is cognitively undemanding. Then we move them forward to B and C, and then finally to quadrant D, which is the most difficult because the demand is high. It's the material is hard to understand, and the context is reduced. So, yeah, we can talk about examples together, but being aware of these quadrants and what we're asking our students to do in terms of understanding how hard is it and how much context we're giving them is key. So, speaking of key takeaways, in subject-specific language learning, that is Taalgericht Vakonderwijs, language is then a gateway to subject learning. So the inhoud, the content is, delivered through the language. Teachers act as language developers, not just in English class or French or German, but in every class. And our toolkit as teachers is that three-pillar support, interaction, and context. So a closing reflection, think about what is one change that you can make in your teaching to better support language development.